This is Leon Charney for Direct Line. We're back. This week we're going to commemorate, celebrate, rejuvenate, I don't know what you want to call it, but anyway, it is the anniversary of the Camp David peace agreement, so peace accords that were signed on March 26, 1979. And we have with us a very prominent guest, my good friend Bob Lipshutz, who exported himself from Atlanta, Georgia this weekend to celebrate with us. And he's going to reminisce about the days of how Camp David Accords came about. As you know, we're a big hit. We have 2 to 3 new stations with us, WJUF in Chicago. We have Hollywood, California, East Valley, South Valley, Central Valley, Middle Valley, Jordan Valley, I don't know. But we got a lot of valleys out in Hollywood and California that are with us. We want to welcome you, and we hope that you enjoy the show. We'll be back in one moment after some messages to introduce and talk and reminisce with Bob Lipshutz. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Leon. Good to be here with you.
10 years later, do you remember where you were on March 26, 1979?
Well, actually, as you know, 10 years from ago today, we were standing on the White House lawn and the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty was signed, which was the culmination of the first of the 2 major parts of the Camp David Accords. It's quite a day to look back on.
You and I did a lot on that day. We visited with your, Rabbi Krolla from Rahway, your
right.
Reform rabbi, who was trying to have me interrupt my life so that he could get a telephone in Netanya. That was the biggest thing.
Well, later on, my rabbi became the president of ARTSA and has been very active in Israeli affairs for many years.
ARTSA is a rabbinical...
It's the reform movement of the Zionist movement.
Bob, it's no secret you and I were teammates, so to speak, odd couple, whatever you want to call it. The audience really doesn't know much about how this whole thing operated. It'd be good for you to fill in a little bit. From your perspective, how did the Camp David peace accords evolve?
Well, when President Carter was elected, he made up his mind that he was going to give major attention to try to resolve the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and its neighbors.
Why?
There was more than one reason. One was a personal dedication to trying to bring peace to that part of the world because of its tremendous historical and religious value to so many people. The other is that he felt that if there was ever going to be a third world war between Soviet Union and the United States, it was most likely to start in the Middle East if the wars of the past there were to spill over and bring both of those powers in. And so he made up his mind early on that he would give major attention to trying to resolve the basic conflict between Israel and its neighbors.
Were you aware of that all the time?
I was aware of the importance that he attributed to it.
You know, one misconception that a lot of people have is that President Carter was not as friendly to the Jewish people as one might expect, but I've always made the point that when I wanted to hold the memorial service for my father in the White House, when I was tagging along with you trying to make this peace happen, we could get 10 Jewish people like Lipshutz and Eisenstadt and Strauss and Linowitz and have a minyan, whereas in the Reagan White House you couldn't see anybody like that. Why has this perception of Carter come about, Bob, in your opinion?
I can't say why the perception, except that there was a little bit of leeriness, people in the Northeast and a certain amount of the Midwest, about a Southern Baptist becoming president of the United States. That was something quite new. And as a matter of fact, about a Southerner becoming president of the United States. So there was a certain amount of lack of knowledge. But as far as the White House staff, as far as President Carter's closest advisors over the years, not just at the White House, there have always been a number of Jewish people without having to make any quotas or anything like that. It just, if they happened to be Jewish and they were qualified to work with him as governor or as president, he was very happy to have him and did.
Well, you know I wrote a book, because the book is about you and me practically, and it's called Special Counsel. And I crisscrossed the country and I made a lot of speeches about how I thought President Carter should be perceived, and I thought he was the most dedicated person in the history of the United States as a president towards making peace, and he did accomplish that and therefore saved thousands and thousands of lives. And yet, when you come back and you talk to people, okay, the boos are not there anymore, but there's no excitement or applause yet. Do you think that'll come?
Yes, I think it's already coming, as a matter of fact, Leon. When you look back on presidencies and on presidents, you frequently get a much better perspective several years after the fact, sometimes many years after the fact. Harry Truman in modern times is one of those examples. And there are some who look very good while they're there, popular and all that, but in historical terms, as far as real accomplishment, don't look quite as good. I think President Carter is looking better and better in those terms, and thank goodness it's happening while he's still alive. Not just on the Middle East peace accomplishment, which is so important, but on many other things that happened. The energy crisis, he faced up to it and got a lot of unpopular reactions by trying to start us on an energy independence course. And it created a lot of political enemies, but it was the right thing to do. When he appointed Paul Volcker as chairman of the Fed, he gave him absolutely independent status, which is quite unlike presidents near election time particularly, but he was determined that was the way to resolve the economic crisis which had built up. It built up starting before he became president and, of course, more so while he was president. It was unpopular, but it was, in his judgment, the right thing to do. In historical terms now, we see that was the right thing to do. And there are many other examples.
Well, Bob, I visited with the president, you've been present, where he told me that there were two very important things to him in his life. Number one was his family. Number one was a secure peace in the Middle East. So his dedication, everybody knows, well, not everybody, you and I at least know about it, and I'm sure most of the world political leaders know about it. People are always asking me this question, Bob, and you're probably the only guy who can answer it. President Carter gave me a book of his called Keeping Faith, his autobiography about his presidency, and he autographed it to me. He said, to my fellow Middle East negotiator, Leon Charney, signed Jimmy Carter. How does a fellow like me, outside the spectrum of the State Department, the bureaucracy, how do I get to a position like that?
Well, Jimmy Carter's a very appreciative person. When people make a contribution to things that he's interested in or he's involved in or he's responsible for, he doesn't hesitate to acknowledge it in a very personal, casual, informal way. And he's his own man. He makes those decisions about people and about things much more so than most people who occupy the kind of a role that he has occupied in history.
Do you think, Bob, this is a tough question, but this is not going to be an easy show for you. You and I were considered a backdoor channel. In other words, I was filtering information to you and you were filtering information to the president. How vital do you think that backdoor channel was to the Camp David peace treaty?
Well, it's not up to me or to you to quantify it, but obviously President Carter felt it was very, very meaningful. He's said so publicly. And many other things were done, obviously. He spent a tremendous amount of his own time in learning about the background of the entire situation, about the personalities involved, about all the vital things that were necessary to consider in trying to resolve this dispute, particularly between Israel and Egypt. And he spent a mammoth amount of his own time studying, talking to people, getting briefings, getting reports, and so forth. And a lot of people made contributions. But he's publicly acknowledged that what we did in that respect was one of those meaningful things that enabled him to make the decisions he did, to take the actions he did, because he was in charge of his own policy. I mean, he was the captain of the ship all the way through on this matter, as he was on many other matters.
Did you have to run through a lot of log jams to get to the president? Because there are a lot of people in the White House who have opinions about foreign policy. And one of the great things about you, and take this with a sense of humility, was that you allowed that access to open. I mean, you allowed my input to get to the president, since I had these fairly good relationships with Israeli leaders. You allowed that door to open, and I think that's quite important. There are drives by people inside the White House. Everybody's got his own agenda. There's a lot of political factionalism there. Did you have a lot of that in the White House?
I can't compare it directly with other White Houses, but I think we probably had less than what I've heard about other White Houses. As far as our particular function in this regard, Leon, it wasn't that I allowed these things to happen. The president wanted this to be a contribution in his efforts to resolve this major problem. And so he encouraged it, and not only was glad to have it, he obviously utilized things. He had a number of channels, but this particular channel he's acknowledged was very helpful. Again, I repeat this, he was in charge of foreign policy, and he was in charge of the Middle East matter. And therefore, he got all the help he could get to come up with his own judgments to how to go about doing things. And this was one of those things that made a contribution that he has acknowledged is very meaningful.
What were the roughest times for you during those days? Do you remember them?
Well, the roughest times, there were a lot of tense times.
Aside the food and the mess, which wasn't that great. I was schlepping along on tuna fish and salads all the time.
Leon,
a lot of heavy mayonnaise.
We had kosher steak dinners when there was an occasion, but we couldn't have a kosher mess for you, so that's all we could feed you was tuna.
But every time I saw you, it wasn't an occasion, so I couldn't get a good meal.
It's just hard to put your finger on what was the toughest time. There were naturally a lot of tense moments. There were a lot of situations that required a great deal of time, and there was a lot of frustration. It's hard to put one particular thing down and say this was the toughest time of all. But on the other hand, it was a very gratifying experience, not just our dealings with the Middle East and in the peace process, but a lot of the other things that we did during the Carter administration were very gratifying, despite the tensions and the pressures and all that went with it.
How do you think President Carter will be remembered in history?
Well, my judgment was, admittedly, is a little bit biased.
A little bit.
Is that he'll be extremely well remembered, not only in future history, but even it's happening now. People are beginning to appreciate a lot of the things that he worked for, despite the fact that they were unpopular. One of the things that obviously helped defeat him in the election with Reagan was the hostage situation. But he was determined in handling that situation that he would keep two things foremost in mind. One was to get the Americans out alive, and the other was to maintain the honor of the United States in doing it. He did both of those things, but unfortunately they happened after the election in November of 1980.
High interest rates also helped push Carter out of the White House.
Correct, and as I mentioned earlier, a reason that happened is that he did not tell Paul Volcker, we've got to prime the pump in order to bring interest rates down, in order to stimulate the economy, to make me a popular president. He turned down recommendations for wage and price control, which President Nixon did before an election, and he just wouldn't do those things. He was determined to look to the best interest of the country, even though it hurt him very badly on this economic issue. There's no question about it.
Our friend President Sadat said that you are the unknown soldier of the peacemaking effort. I agree, but as usually with an amendment. A soldier in the service of peace, you are. You are, Mr. President, even horrible dictu, an intransigent fighter for peace. But Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States, is not completely unknown. And so is his effort, which will be remembered and recorded by generations to come. It is, of course, a great day in your life, Mr. President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. In the face of adversity and hostility, you have demonstrated the human value that can change history, civil courage. A great field commander once said, civil courage is sometimes more difficult to show than military courage. You showed both, Mr. President. But now it is time for all of us to show civil courage in order to proclaim to our peoples and to others, no more war, no more bloodshed, no more bereavement, peace unto you, shalom, salam, forever.
It was March 26th, 1979, the most exciting day of your life during the period of time you're at the White House?
Whether it was the most exciting, I'm not so sure. Perhaps the inauguration was as exciting after all the campaign that we'd gone through for about 3 years. But there's no question that was a highlight, a very important highlight of my experience there and of the Carter administration.
Bob, I've met with the president. He has a keen interest now in the Middle East. As I said before, he's got great relationships with most all of the Arab leaders that I know about, and obviously he can see anybody in Israel he wants. Do you think he can still be a constructive force in bringing peace to the Middle East?
He is very willing to be a positive force, but it recognizes that it can only be done with the consent and the wishes of the administration, whether it be the past administration or the current administration or a future one. He does not try to put himself in the position of speaking for the government. Very careful that he does not do that. But he is certainly keeping up with things and keeping up the contacts with the people and with the issues, very much so. Has meetings at the Carter Center, bringing in people from all over the world to discuss these matters. But as far as taking a direct role, that would only be if the administration in power both wanted him to do it and that made it clear to him just what his role might be, and it was satisfactory.
Vice President Quayle took a shot at him when he was in Nicaragua a couple of weeks ago, criticizing him for meeting with President Ortega. Do you remember that?
I remember the press report and I found out later what had actually happened. Someone who was interviewing Quayle, Vice President Quayle at that time, lied to the Vice President about something that supposedly that President Carter had said.
The press lie, Bob?
No names. And Quayle reacted to that report, which was a false report, in a perfectly natural manner. Since then, the facts have been straightened out between Vice President Quayle and President Carter.
We're going to come back after some messages from our sponsors, Bob, and continue with an interesting insight into President Carter. We're back with Bob Lipshutz, former counsel to President Carter in the Carter White House days. Bob, you also played a role with President Carter while he was governor, didn't you?
Yes, I first met President Carter when he was a candidate for governor in 1966. And in that election, he came in third. Unfortunately, the state elected Lester Maddox that year, but he began to run again. 4 years later, he was elected governor, and I began to work with him.
Lester Maddox?
I began to work with President Carter, Governor Carter, in his administration on a part-time basis. I was not involved actually officially in state government except on boards. And then I began to work very intensively with him on his campaign for the presidency.
So you've been in politics for about 20, 25 years.
Well, I've always taken an interest in politics, but never with the depth of the seriousness that I did once I became involved with Jimmy Carter.
Bob, what is a politician?
I guess it's whatever he is in the eyes of the beholder, so I won't try to give it a broad definition.
Can't get this Southerner to commit. Let me throw some names at you. Moshe Dayan. Any recollections of him?
Well, I think that he played a major role in working out the Camp David Accords and the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. There's no question that he was one of the key constructive factors in making that work.
Did you have any dealings with him?
I had very few directly with him, personally. The president had a lot of dealings with him. Secretary Vance had a lot of dealings with him, but I didn't.
Menachem Begin.
Well, Menachem Begin was a very difficult person to negotiate with, but in retrospect, I have a great deal of respect for the man, and also I feel very sad that he had to end his career on the disappointment of the Lebanese situation. But I think he was, in the overall picture, a very good person for the State of Israel and a very key person in working out this peace arrangement that we now have with Egypt.
Anwar Sadat.
Well, I was in the presence of Anwar Sadat on a number of occasions, but never really had any intimate dealings with him. But again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for what I know about the man. I know a lot through President Carter and through others who did have a lot of direct experience with him, and a tremendous amount of respect for the man and for his courage in doing what he did. I think it's important to realize that in the case of Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat both, that they acted in the self-interest of their own country, as did President Carter act in the self-interest of the United States throughout this whole matter. That was paramount, and it was obvious certainly to President Carter that if there were going to be a resolution, it had to be resolved on a win-win basis, and that's the way it finally was resolved. And I think in diplomacy that's extremely important when you have antagonists, to come up with a solution in which both sides win. And otherwise, I think any kind of an agreement, a peace treaty, is meaningless and likely to be short-lived.
You want to give us an opinion about a friend of mine, Mr. Weitzman?
Oh, well, Asa Weitzman obviously was extremely, extremely important in this whole process, not just in the relationship which you and I had with him, and he has with President Carter through us and all that, but I think within the Israeli populace and within the Israeli government, when he is a member of the government, or even when outside, and if he's not a member of the government, he's a very constructive force. And I think he represents, in my judgment, the best that there is to speak about Israel and modern Israel's history, and even its present movement towards what I hope is even a broader peace and a greater future.
Have you ever met the Prime Minister, Shamir?
No, I haven't met him personally. I've been in situations where he was there, but I never really met him.
Shimon Peres?
Yes, I've met him. I've talked with him even privately occasionally, although most of the private discussions were about the time that we were going to Washington. He was in Atlanta, for instance, and I spent about 20, 30 minutes with him alone just before I went to Washington to join the Carter administration. And then I've seen him on brief visits since then.
What'd you think of him?
Looking at things, looking back on things now, I am disappointed that he did not move more decisively on the peace process when he was the Prime Minister under the coalition government.
Last week we had a panel.
That's now the history.
No, we had a panel discussion last week with 3 Israeli journalists.
Yes.
And one of the questions was whether Peres should have broken the government on the grounds that the peace process was not moving forward. And the consensus of that panel was yes, and that probably would go down in history as a very, very tortuous day for the people of Israel. You have any feelings about that?
Well, those opinions that you're quoting are not inconsistent with my judgment from a much greater distance, of course, about that particular time and that opportunity which I believe was missed. Whether the procedure should have been to break the government or to move some other way, I don't know, because I don't know other alternatives might have been available, especially when Shimon Peres was the Prime Minister.
Are you disappointed today, 10 years after the Camp David peace treaty, about what has gone on and how far things have progressed in that region?
I'm not disappointed at all about the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. I think that has held under some rather trying circumstances. There have been pressures within both countries against the success of it, and the peace treaty has withstood those pressures. There was the Lebanese invasion by Israel, and the peace treaty withstood
Article
that.
6.
And Article 6 was observed faithfully by the Egyptians, even though I'm sure they must have had a tremendous amount of pressure from people in the Arab world and within Egypt.
You remember that article, Bob?
Yes, I do remember. It was a very key factor in resolving the Israeli-Egyptian situation.
You woke me up on a Friday night on that article, if you remember.
Well, I tried to reach in synagogue that Friday night, but you weren't there.
I was out at the stage delicatessen, seeing if I could find some good corned beef.
But it was very vital. There's no question about that.
Bob, the scenario for the next 5 years, you got any opinions? Do you have any opinions?
I think that the next 4 years, let's talk about those, because in American politics, 4 years is a key cycle. I think that the progress in the Middle East towards peace between Israel and others besides Egypt, and this resolution of the Palestinian situation depends upon the American government. Most of all, it depends on others too, but without the American government taking a very positive and progressive position and sticking with it and putting it up near the front burner of its foreign policy, I think it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the peace process to move forward. I think the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty will hold even if we don't see any progress otherwise. But as far as resolving these other matters and moving towards the comprehensive peace that ultimately is Israel's best interest as well as America's best interest, as well as, I think, the Arab countries' best interest, it's going to require an American government, American administration, which will really put it on the front burner. Hopefully from the beginning, and I think Secretary Baker has indicated that he's starting in that direction. And I hope that this picks up momentum and keeps moving forward, although there are going to be a lot of obstacles and a lot of debate, and I'm not going to try to prescribe the method it should be done, but that to me is key.
Camp David was done without Stolichnaya. We now have the Stolichnaya people with us, the Russians. They've become a practically a different country than we knew them 10 years ago. Gorbachev has certainly made some tremendous inroads. Shevardnadze's been through the Middle East with Khomeini. I mean, they want to become active players. What do you think? How do you think the fit will be now?
Well, I hardly can speak as an expert on the Russian government and anything else in regard to that, but I think that the Russians' moves overall, including the Middle East in these last months, do create a situation which is perhaps helpful and perhaps dangerous, because the United States still has to take the lead. Now, we cannot separate the United States' actions in the Middle East from its relationship with the Soviet Union. And I think that as we hopefully develop a better and better relationship with the Soviet Union, work towards mutual disarmament and all of the good things that we would like to see in the world, that these two countries can be the key to, it's also going to give the Soviet Union a natural role in the Middle East situation. We cannot be working towards a camaraderie in Europe and a camaraderie in arms control and all of those things with the Russians, and then say to the Russians, but we don't want you in the Middle East, because after all, they're closer to the boundaries of the Middle East than we are, and they have their interests there too, and unfortunately, we can't dominate.
I'm going to go get some vodka. Hold you for a minute, Bob, and we'll come back after these commercial breaks.
Okay.
Stay tuned for an important offer from Barron's.
Usually buy a stock in the expectation that it's going to go up. The problem is you're buying it from someone equally convinced that it's going to go down. Now, who would you rather be? The person who reads Barron's or the person who doesn't?
Subscribe now to Barron's and get 13 weeks for only $26 with a money-back guarantee. Call 800-228-6609. That's 800-228-6609.
back with Robert J. Lipshutz, former counsel to President Carter during the Camp David Accord and peace treaty days. The accords were signed in September, the peace treaty on March 26, 10 years ago in 1979. We've just had a little vodka, so our answers may be a little tumuldic now, but I think we'll get them out. Bob, will there be a Palestinian state?
Well, once again, to try to predict the outcome
Oh, here we go. The
of
prophets.
negotiations, it could perhaps do more harm than good, even though maybe no one's listening.
But it's entertaining. This is an entertainment show.
Well, let's be funny. But in all seriousness,
No, we're not trying to be funny.
I think that the rights of the Palestinian people as a separate people from other Arabs, from Israelis, Israeli Jews, really must be recognized if we're going to have a satisfactory resolution to the problems that are existing there and have been existing all these years. You cannot treat Palestinian Arabs as less than human beings than anyone else in that area, anyone else as far as that's concerned. And so there must be something that recognizes their rights, their dignity, and their future if we're going to resolve it. I'm not going to try to sit here and say the way to do it. The Camp David Accords gave a procedure by which there could be some resolution. That's got stalled along.
That's 5 years overdue.
That's got stalled. It's 8 years overdue. It got stalled along the way. After President Carter left office, there was really no action taken to try to move it forward. I'm not going to try to put where all the blame is, but
Are you insinuating President Reagan slept on the Middle East?
well, obviously the Middle East situation was not on the front burner. There were other things that took most of the attention on foreign policy, Latin America, Soviet relations, all of which are very important.
But President Carter had the same problem.
Of course he did, but I'm just suggesting that...
But he wasn't an actor.
Well, I'm just suggesting that President Bush and his administration have the opportunity now to do something, but they also have the responsibility, in my judgment, to keep moving as they've started.
This book look familiar to you, Bob?
Yes, it does. It certainly does.
You recall that there's a memo in this book about autonomy for Palestinians? Do you recall?
Yes, I don't remember all the details now, but at that time it certainly seemed very logical. But once again, you've got to get the people talking.
So your opinion is that, am I correct in this? I don't want to put words into your mouth, that if you didn't have a Palestinian state and you had full autonomy, that might satisfy the goals of the Palestinian people?
Well, if I answered your question, you would be putting words in my mouth. So
no, I don't want to do that. So
I think autonomy process agreed at Camp David did not project the result. What it did project was a definite method of building confidence between the two peoples involved over a period of time by definite stages, and out of that, by mutual agreement, each one looking after his own self-interest, the parties would finally come up with a resolution, as we saw what was done in the Egyptian-Israeli situation.
But the problem is, who is going to talk for the Palestinians?
Well, that's one of the problems that needs to be resolved, but that doesn't mean that the American government or the Israeli government can ignore the fact that it needs to move forward.
Bob, give me a picture of 10 years from now, the Middle East.
I'm afraid, Leon, I'm not the crystal ball gazer that you're looking for. I can tell you my hope. My hope is that the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs will be living in a very good, harmonious relationship with themselves, with each other, with the Jordanians, and continue with the Egyptians, and hopefully with the Syrians and the Lebanese who are on the other two borders. The way it will come about, I don't know, but I think there is some hope. And once again, the hope is built on self-interest of each party, that this be the result. And then some country, particularly the United States, can take the lead in helping the parties come up with that resolution, step by step, country by country, people by people.
Let's clear up a little bit of old histrionics in history. President Carter and Menachem Begin got into a dispute about some of the language that they signed after the Camp David peace accords. Do you remember those incidents?
I remember a dispute about interpretation of of how quickly the settlements would be
Settlements.
resumed in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria.
What is the relationship today of President Carter with Menachem Begin?
Well, unfortunately, since Menachem Begin has gone into really seclusion, not just as far as President Carter is concerned, but most people outside, there hasn't been any contact other than by written communications. I don't know what they are, but I know there's been some. But
Now, I understand he telephoned him, too, on his last trip to Israel.
Well, I'm
President
sure.
Carter telephoned Menachem
But the last
Begin.
time I saw Menachem Begin was in Plains, Georgia, after President Carter had returned home and had left the presidency. He flew down to Plains, Georgia, and there was a very meaningful reunion there at that time. And that is, to the best of my knowledge, I'm sure that was the last time that they've been together personally.
Is that the first time they had kosher food in Plains, Georgia?
I don't think they had to worry about that. I think Mrs. Carter prepared lunch in a proper manner. Probably had tuna fish salad.
This will go big with our audience, I'm telling you. Maybe she has a recipe. We can do a new book for Rosalind Carter on kosher cooking.
No, the Carters had kosher caterers for all the official occasions at the White House that the Israeli government people were involved.
Bob, people worry, not worry, that's the wrong word. People ask me this continuously since they know that I have a relationship with President Carter. They say, what is he doing now?
He's a very busy former president, he and his wife both. Mrs. Carter...
Does he play golf?
No, he doesn't play golf. As a minor thing, his recreation includes fishing, hunting, woodwork, but most of his time is spent in a very constructive manner built around the Carter Center and the Carter Center for Emory University and the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, all of which is together.
You're a
in
trustee
Atlanta.
of the library?
Yes, and there are it's not only a museum where the history of both the Carter administration and some of the prior administrations of American history are very vividly depicted and a source of research for people who wish to write and study and so forth, but also a very active program that's going on constantly in different areas, diplomacy, international matters, economic matters, and health matters. Health has become a big factor in the program of the Carter Institute at Emory University. And President Carter and Mrs. Carter spend, you might say, all of their waking time in connection with these programs and really taking the lead responsibility in seeing them carried out with meetings, with all kinds of activities that contribute to this.
So he doesn't serve on any personal boards or corporate
Business
boards?
corporate? No, he doesn't serve on business corporations at all.
Is that his own rules, so self-imposed
Yeah, he
rules?
made the decision not to serve on commercial boards of directors.
And
I think Mrs. Carter's on one communication, the Gannett newspaper people, communication group.
would it be easy for a private citizen to get an appointment to see President Carter today, or he's very jammed?
I don't know. He's a very busy person, but he sees a lot of people and does a lot of work with people as well as in the background and preparing for these programs and all.
I personally suggested to President Carter that he try to run again before last year's election. He said to me, Leon, that's not really what I want to do. I'm really happy in what I'm doing now. And he does something called Global 2000.
Global 2000 is one of the programs that's conducted from the Carter Center. It's a major program, particularly in Africa and a little bit in Southern Asia, to try to bring about the green revolution in many of these countries that was so successful in India. As a matter of fact, the man who developed it in India is in charge of the program there. On the other hand, the health programs, as I mentioned, worldwide, particularly in the underdeveloped world, are major activities. Dr. William Foege, spelled his name F-O-E-G-E, who had been the head of the CDC before he came to the Carter Center as executive director, has taken the lead, and President Carter has worked very closely with him on these major programs to eradicate diseases throughout the world, in particular, as I said, in the underdeveloped countries such as in Africa.
Bob, I assume that you would not disagree with me that the president should be nominated and probably given a Nobel Peace Prize. I really don't understand why he didn't get it. I mean, Menachem Begin got it, Anwar Sadat got it, and I'm sure that he contributed as much to peace in this world as anybody else. Are there any political reasons you think he didn't get this?
Well, at the time that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Sadat and Begin, it was definitely with President Carter's blessing, and to this day is with his blessing. And he has never expressed to me a desire for that recognition or for other recognition as far as that goes. He's very satisfied with what he's accomplished in the past and keeps trying to accomplish other things in the future, including in this area of the Middle East peace process. There are ways in which people can be recognized for their accomplishment other than the Nobel Peace Prize. Obviously, it would be nice, but that's not an objective in itself.
Well, my reasoning is not only for Camp David, Bob, but it's what I said before. I think whenever I walk or go around the country and I speak about Carter, the one thing I always hear is that, I trusted that man. I believe that man. He has credibility. His administration was basically a clean administration. He had some flap with Burt Lance, and Hamilton Jordan had a problem, but he was cleared on that problem. But it was basically a very clean administration. The Reagan administration, I'm not saying it had anything to do with President Reagan, but the people around him, the satellite people, all got into jams. You had Mike Deaver and the fellow with the goatee, I forgot his name, one of his political consultants. I mean, they got into a lot of problems. And a lot of people lost faith in the fact that the political process or politicians are basically honest. New York City now is engulfed in a maze of political problems and briberies and scandals and all that. And people lose respect. And what happens, Bob, is that the electorate turns off. 54% of, I think, the people who could vote voted in the last election. And that's really a problem. Alan Cranston, the senator from California, came to me and asked me to help him support such a project, that this was a real fear for him, that the attrition of the younger people and the yuppies and the yuppies, and these people were getting turned off. And you, as a sagacious man and a wise counselor, must have some insight into this problem.
When President Carter ran for president, and when he ran for the nomination before that, he emphasized very much this issue of ethics in government. And frankly, it was a somewhat new issue as far as the kind of emphasis that he gave to it. And I imagine a lot of people were skeptical as to whether it really meant anything. Keep in mind also that this grew out of the Watergate era. It was people thinking about it. That's when the public esteem of political leadership was probably at its low in our modern times. President Ford and his administration started to turn things around very well. They worked very hard at it. President Carter picked up on it not just because he'd campaigned, but because he believed that it was critical. Some of the things you're saying that restored the faith of the American people in the integrity of the government, and particularly the presidency. And he meant it. I worked with him on the ethics issues all the time, not just in clearing people to come into the administration, but in monitoring their behavior, if you will, once they were there. And I think we were extremely successful in that regard. I'm glad to see that President Bush is making a big point of that. He did in his campaign, and he's still talking the same way, and I hope that he will continue, because it's not just for his success as a president, but it's for the strengthening of the American government and the strengthening of the presidency itself. And it's now pretty well ingrained in people's minds, despite, as you said, the things that happened during these past 8 years, that this is important. And it's very important. And if you don't make a sincere effort to maintain a high level of ethics in government, particularly in the high levels of the federal government, then it is going to hurt the nation as a whole. And so I'm hoping that this is now a permanent fixture. And the other area that happened to be emphasized by President Carter was human rights throughout the world. Again, a lot of people, cynics, poo-pooed it as a thing. He stressed time and again, this is to be the foundation of our foreign policy. And you'll notice that even President Reagan's emphasis never got too far away from at least repeating that same language. And President Bush, of course, has emphasized it also. And so these are some lasting contributions towards the strengthening of our country, the strengthening of our federal government, and hopefully restoring the faith of the American people in that government and in that presidency.
A lot of people today are comparing the Bush style of administration to the Carter style of administration. Bush seems to be a very open guy. He's bringing senators up to his bedroom. His puppies are having babies on and his wife's bed, and he's like a gadfly. He's flying around the White House, and he's feeling chipper and happy, as contrasted to the imperial presidency of Ronald Reagan. You think it's a true comparison, Bob?
Well, some of the things you mentioned certainly are analogous, and we will see how it works over the next few years. I hope it does.
We'll take a commercial and we'll go into pregnancies and puppies at the White House.
It is a historic turning point of great significance for all peace-loving nations. Those among us who are endowed with vision cannot fail to comprehend the dimensions of our sacred mission. The Egyptian people, with their heritage and unique awareness of history, have realized from the very beginning the meaning and value of this endeavor. In all the steps I took, I was not performing a personal mission. I was merely expressing the will of a nation. I'm proud of my people and of belonging to them. Today, a new dawn is emerging out of the darkness of the past. A new chapter is being opened in the history of coexistence among nations, one that is worthy of our spiritual values and civilization. Never before had men encountered such a complex dispute, which is highly charged with emotions. Never before did men need that much courage and imagination to confront a single challenge. Never before had any cause generated that much interest in all four corners of the globe. Men and women of goodwill have labored day and night to bring about this happy moment. Egyptians and Israelis alike pursued their sacred goal, undeterred by difficulties and complications. Hundreds of dedicated individuals on both sides have given generously of their thought and effort to translate the cherished dream into a living reality. But the man who performed the miracle was President Carter.
Bob Lipshutz, counsel to the President of the United States. I think the second Jewish counsel to the President of the United States. Judge Roseman, I think, was
Franklin Roosevelt.
Franklin Roosevelt.
He was the first counsel to the president. There'd never been one before that.
And you're the second.
No, he was the first one of any president, for any president.
But you're the second Jewish one. You're Avis.
Okay.
Anyway, pleasure to have you. You've become a very, very close friend of mine. And I hope we are together 10 years from now looking at a peaceful solution in the Middle East. You know, I've got a mother and a sister and a nephew up in the borders now, and we don't want to see any more killing. And I think the world appreciates basically what President Carter did, and they're going to appreciate it more and more. We want to thank all the viewers for tuning in today for this Camp David celebration. I don't know if it was a celebration, it was a commemoration, if not a history of the Carter presidency. Whatever it was, I hope you enjoyed it. We really want to thank you for the tremendous amounts of letters that we're getting from our viewers. We hope it continues only because it gives us a feeling about how you think about different things, and you are the people who really make up the vox populi of what represents this country. We'll see you again maybe next week from Taba. We're not sure.